What's up guys, I'm Havoc, and today I'm going to tell you objectively what the best and worst assault rifles are to use stopping power on in Call of Duty Warzone. This video took dozens of hours and plenty of attempts refining my testing methods until I was confident I got quality results. If you liked the video, be sure to drop a like. If you don't, a dislike. Either way, let me know in the comments your thoughts. If you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing, as I'm working on doing the same project for the SMGs, LMGs, and other guns in the game as well. A little bit of background as to why I decided to work on this. I had been looking up online in YouTube and other places what exactly stopping power did, but nobody had a real answer, and those who did claim to have answers were conflicting, saying 2x damage or it's weird. It is kind of weird because it damages your armor and health at the same time. But I really wanted to find a definitive answer as to what exactly stopping power does. Before we get into all the numbers, I briefly like to talk about my testing methods and how I arrived at my conclusions. For my base damage and RPM, gathered it from TrueGameData.com. TrueGameData is an amazing content creator. Definitely check him out if you haven't already. For measuring the armor and health damage, which I'll show on each slide, I took the pixel counts of each bar and then divided that by the value of the bar to get the integer damage that each bar was taking. So for the armor, it's 100 health over 263 pixels. So by taking however much is missing and dividing that by 263, you get the percent that's missing, and then you can multiply that by 100, which is the total value of the health. You can get the integer value. And then the same thing for the armor, but it's 50 per bar instead of 100. And for some reason, the last bar is a little bit longer than every of the other bars. It kind of annoyed me and made the measurements a little bit more annoying to do. And then the combined damage I'll show is just the health damage plus the armor damage. The multiplier is the combined damage divided by the base damage. The TTK decrease, which decrease is a good thing because you want to kill people in less time, is the stopping power TTK, which would just be the combined damage, so the total damage for one bullet of stopping power times the RPM divided by 250, minus the base TTK, which would be the base damage times the RPM divided by 250. All of these tests were done at 3 plates, so the assumption is you're always killing somebody who has 3 plates on. And then for the recoil, as in stopping power, your recoil is increased. The stopping power recoil was measured, well, both recoils were measured using a best fit line on a 5 repeated spray patterns with stopping power, and then 5 repeated spray patterns without stopping power, using maximum aiming stability builds to reduce variance between the different bullet sprays. And so dividing the stopping power length divided by the normal length, multiplying by 100, you can get the percent increase over the base recoil. Something to note on most of these guns is that the armor damage that you end up taking is either exactly or just above the base damage of the gun. So you can see that the base damages here are 56, 42, 35, 35, which I mentioned are in head, chest, stomach, and limb damage areas. And these are 55, 44, 37, 37. So the chest, stomach, and limb are a bit higher on the AK, but the armor damage is just 1 point lower. So where you're really getting most of your boost in damage from stopping power is in the health damage area. So we sum together to get our combined damages, and this combined damage is a multiplier over the base damage per head. Kind of middle of the pack, 1.5, 1.6 area is sort of middle for most of the weapons. The chest shot of 1.8 is quite high, and then some more 1.5s, averaging out. If you weight every one of these regions equally, it's 1.62, which decreases your TTK overall in the head and chest by about the same, even though their multipliers are different, because the multiplier, although it has effect on TTK, it doesn't increase the TTK by that much amount, so your TTK is not 1.81 faster because it only cares about when you hit 250. So your head and chest are decreased, so you'll kill faster by 220 milliseconds, and the stomach and limbs are 330. with the average weighting each of these equally of 276 milliseconds. So a quarter of a second is pretty good. And for the recoil, you've got the normal recoil coming in at 337 pixels in magnitude, and the stopping power recoil at 590 pixels in magnitude. So you're getting 174% recoil on the AK, which is kind of bad because people already know that the AK recoil is a little bit harder to deal with. And for a lot of people's favorite gun, the AMAX, which is it's getting a lot of light out there. It has the same sort of deal where some of these values for armor, they're pretty much aligned to the base damage, and you're just getting the health damage bonus, with armor being just below, and then the headshot being just below, and then the chest, stomach, and limb being above. Get your combined damage values coming out to multipliers of about 1.6, a good even value, 1.8, 1.5, 1.5, 1.6. So between the AMAX and the AK, you can sort of see that they have about the same multipliers across each one, with their TTK on the AMAX being 190 faster for head and chest and 286 milliseconds faster for stomach and limb, averaging out to 238 milliseconds. Your base recoil of 310 with your stopping power recoil of 536 gives you 172% of your base recoil. Very similar to the AK. AN94 follows the similar trend to the previous guns. Although in this case, your armor damage is higher than the base damage headshot. But again, most of your increase in damage is coming from the health damage portion. Your combined damage is very high headshot damage, where it sort of tapers off like you would expect it to. DPS multiplier, very high for headshots. 1.9 is a very good multiplier on your DPS. Whereas you got some more middle of the pack to low DPS multipliers for chest, stomach, and limbs, averaging out to another sort of normal multiplier. TTK increases are quite good for the head, chest, and stomach, whereas where you're going to hit most of the time. Whereas the limb is good, but averaging out a quarter of a second faster TTK is very nice. For the recoil, there's not too much of an increase from the base recoil. It's only about 390 on your stopping power, about 300 for your normal. You're only getting a 131% of your base recoil on the AN94, which makes it quite accurate when you're still using stopping power. And it doesn't change the bounce of it too much. As you can see, this is a pretty consistent path. For the FAL and other semi-auto guns like the Famas, these are a bit annoying to test the recoils on, but the damages were fine. For doing recoils, what I would do is I would actually take my mouse, I would set my primary fire to scroll wheel down, and I would roll my mouse against my arm to get the maximum fire rate, just to make sure that the recoils weren't being changed by my own ability to click. This tells a similar story to the other ones, where armor damage lines up with the base damage, and then the health damage is increased. It's kind of interesting for this and one other gun, where because of the stopping power increase, your stomach and limb damages are actually end up being higher than the chest damage after the multipliers, which is sort of odd, but just something to think about if you're ever caught in that situation, that you don't have to be super accurate, which is nice because the accuracy is kind of all over the place. The DPS multipliers are sort of low to mid for the head and chest, very high for the stomach and limbs, which is probably why their combined damage is so much higher, averaging out at a really solid 1.7 multiplier. The TTK decreases pretty low for the head, sort of middle for the chest, and then very good for the stomach and limbs. And then weighting to them equally, a third of a second faster time to kill is very solid for the FAL. Although that does come at a price, with a 218% base recoil. As you can see here, the bullets are just spread all over the place compared to this one, and their path is much, much longer. Other one of our semi-auto burst guns is our Famas. Again, with the armor damage almost aligning with the base damage exactly. Health damage giving you the bonus. Your combined damage of 90 and 70 for all the bodies. Pretty not too great DPS multiplier for the head, but for the chest, stomach, and limb areas, it's pretty solid. So it gives you a nice average. The TTK decrease, not too great for the head, but pretty good for the chest, stomach, and limbs, which is actually quite good because when you're using the Famas, something about it being a burst rifle is really important when it comes to the recoil, because the recoil between those burst shots are going to jump you up almost this entire recoil path. And so you're going to want to start your aim maybe at like the low stomach, which is nice because the multipliers are much better for the stomach and chest than the head. So as you aim for the stomach, your aim will like bounce up towards their head, and you'll still be getting quite good time to kills because of the way that they divided the multipliers. For the recoil, you can see it's 173% of the base, which is why you need to take that into account and aim a bit lower, because your burst is gonna, like I said, it's gonna push you up your target. The Grau, I mean, this thing is a beauty. I absolutely love the Grau. I've been trying it out in Warzone, and I'm playing a bit of Plunder as the field upgrades are more relevant there. But I mean, the damage multipliers, I'll be honest, they're not that great. Headshot, really good. But then the TTKs, like, this is something you gotta look out for, because the DPS multiplier might be great, but the TTKs are still the same amount of decrease. I mean, 1 millisecond margin of error. You can see 1.43, 165 millisecond decrease, but 181, 164. So the multipliers don't exactly mean you get a faster time to kill. But what's the really impressive part about the Grau is the percentage of base recoil that using stopping power does. This one over here on the right really is what the gun normally recoils like, and the one on the left is the stopping power. Measuring it out, I got 107% of the base, but there's a little bit of margin of error in my measurements, and so this gun is really close to being the same. Like, you put stopping power on it, it doesn't even feel different to use. So just getting that extra damage for pretty much no downside at all is fantastic. And then on the other side is the Kilo. It's got pretty much the same multipliers and TTK decreases, a few points and a few milliseconds. But oh my gosh, the recoil is horrible on the Kilo. Your base Kilo, is one of the most accurate long-range weapons, but the stopping power recoil is huge compared to the base. It's 367%, which is insane. Absolutely insane. And for the same benefit that you're getting on the Grau. So if you have a Grau and your friend has a Kilo, don't let him use the stopping power. Tell him to put it in your gun instead. M13, this one stands out in a different way. The armor damage values are actually quite a bit higher than the chest, stomach, and limb, whereas the headshot armor damage values are pretty much the same. And then you're still getting a nice increase from the health damage, which means your combined damage is quite high for all of these. For the M13, you've got these massive multipliers for chest, stomach, and limb of over a 2x multiplier, the best multipliers that there are, even giving you a huge average multiplier of 1.9, which is just insane amounts of DPS increase. But like I've been saying, DPS increase doesn't necessarily equate to a much higher TTK. But you're still getting a third of a second on most of these, with the headshot being the only one that's kind of iffy on how good it is, averaging out to 0.25 to 0.3 seconds faster. But the recoil is where you end up paying for that massive DPS increase, with about a 300% base recoil using stopping power over the normal recoil of the M13. M4 is kind of about the same as the Grau in terms of the DPS multipliers. Nothing too interesting about the M4. You know, you're getting about 150 milliseconds faster with the moderate recoil increase. So there's some guns that are sort of like this where you get a bit of a boost to your DPS and TTK, and then, you know, a small penalty to pay in the price of recoil. You can sort of see the variance around the line increases, which is something I didn't quantify, but the patterns are pretty much the same with just a little bit of an increase in magnitude. But you slap on some recoil control attachments and it won't be that noticeable. The Oden, kind of notorious for feeling like it has massive amounts of recoil. This is another one of the weapons that is interesting because the multipliers vary so widely across the different regions of damaging, with head being pretty low, chest being sort of an average multiplier, and stomach and limb being really high, getting to the 2x. Your TTKs sort of align to that, where the lower multiplier, you know, gives you a little bit of a bump, but the chest multiplier, you know, killing a third of a second faster, with the stomach and limb TTKs being, you know, 0.4 seconds. That's a lot of time faster, but that does come at the steep price of your base Oden recoil compared to your stopping power Oden recoil, which is just, as you can see, it kicks all over the place while increasing the magnitude by almost 200%. So if you can use it, it's got fantastic decreases in time to kill. You're going to be killing crazy fast with this thing, but I don't know if you're going to hit your target very well. The Ram 7, it's honestly one of the worst ones of the bunch. It lines up pretty much as expected of most of the guns, where the armor's a bit higher. DPS multipliers for the chest, stomach, and limb are all the same. They're all pretty on the low side. DPS multiplier for the head, it's on the high side, but because of the way that the math works, the TTKs end up being decreased by all the same. So, I mean, it's consistent, but it's just not that good. 0.14 seconds faster is not that impressive for these guns. And then, of course, it does increase your recoil from the base. You're shooting at like about 142% recoil, which is, I mean, it's fine, but it's not really worth the TTK or decrease. And the Scar has average multipliers, but because of the exact amounts of damage that the bullets are doing, going from 35s to 54, the TTK ends up being a huge increase over the base, getting up into that above 0.3 seconds. But the percentage recoil it doesn't look too bad when you like look at them side to side, but the magnitude of the lines is almost 160 over the base, which really depends. I mean, you can get used to the higher recoil amounts, and then recoil control attachments will obviously help, but this is one of those ones that's like, you get a nice boost, but then the recoil is boosted to go with it. And for the last one before the wrap up, we have the Val, which is the best TTK gun in the game without stopping power compared to every other gun. Absolutely fantastic. Its armor damage multiplier, or like the amount of extra it does, is almost non-existent. This does one more point of damage to the head, so you're getting all of the boost in the health damage. The DPS multipliers are pretty normal, 1.4 to 1.6 in chest, stomach, and limb, whereas the head gets the biggest boost, but the TTK's increase is not that impressive, only about 0.2 all the way down to 1.3. Average is fine, but you already have a really fast recoil, so the magnitude that you're going with is only 32% more, but it definitely plays a part in to whether you should use it or not. So then combining all of these into comparing them to each other. The DPS recoil in TTKs. These are done with a heat map, and they're all sorted by their averages for each of these charts. So as you can see, earlier we talked about the M13 with its huge, like over 2.0 multipliers, averaging out to massive amounts. So you've got your M13, your Fail, your Oden. I don't know, Oden was another one I talked about. So the having huge multipliers, but its head multiplier is so awful. And then we've got some of our more popular, like, meta weapons. I know it's a sort of interesting trend. Your M4, your Kilo, your Grau, having sort of bad multipliers for their damage over. I mean, you're still getting 1.5 multipliers, but not as good as some of the higher ones. But I mean, a 1.5 to a 1.7 DPS. I don't think. I mean, DPS is important to know, but I think the stat that is most important is the TTK. So with the Oden, I mentioned this earlier, it's got amazing time to kill increase with the stomach and limbs. And since it's kicking all over the place when you're using it, you're going to have to control that recoil like crazy. You're definitely going to hit all of the different parts of the body, killing about a little over a third of a second faster, which is, I mean, that's huge. That's the time to kill of just some guns in the game is that fast. FIL is another one where it's got huge stomach and limb multipliers, which help because of the amazing variance in those. The Famas, GTK, another over the 0.3 seconds. Talk about how to use this one too, is to aim a bit lower because of the spray kicking it upwards. And then the Grau Kilos and for this, our more meta weapons are just kind of sadly all at the bottom here with their TTKs barely getting increased. I mean, the Val almost up at 0.2 seconds. Like, that's significant. It's not as good as the top ones. M13 being very good still because of those huge DPS multipliers. And then sorting them by their recoil, their base recoil, how much over it is. The Grau, extremely impressive, kind of in a class of its own at barely increasing the recoil. I mean, go try it out in a custom game, put some solid power in a Grau. You won't even notice that you have any increase over the normal recoil. And then sort of on the bottom, where I've seen that M4 on the bottom, its recoil is actually really nice. So if you're an M4 or a Grau user, you kind of get that free bonus with just a bit of increase to the recoil. We've got the A94, the Val, the M7, and I guess kind of the Scar in that low to mid recoil increase range. AMAX, Famas, and AK all in the 170s. So pretty moderate recoil increases. And then you've got the huge recoil increases down here with M13, the Kilo, obviously insane amounts of recoil increase at 300 and almost 400%. Then your Fallon Oden around 200. And then to sort of rank these, what I decided to do was put their ratio of their good to the bad. So the good being how much DPS bonus you get, and the bad being how much your recoil gets increased. Ranking these out, we get, as I was talking about earlier, just the fact that you get a kind of a free bonus in the DPS of the Grau over the recoil increase puts the Grau as my top DPS rank for guns. M4, A94, Val, all about the same at a 1.2. We've got the Ram 7 Scar from us, AK and AMAX, sort of the 1.9 to, or not 1.9, but 0.9 to 1. And then we've got our lower tier ones here. And these are, unitless values. They're just sort of the ratio between the increases. Just the Kilo being awful. And the M13 just as well. Just kind of sad because people expect the M13 to be an accurate weapon. And then when you put stopping power in it, it's the opposite. And doing that same thing, but for the time to kills, the A94 is finally the best at something. The A94, the Scar, and the Famas are all about the same in terms of the average time to kill decrease for recoil. So the Famas having really good time to kill decrease, but with a pretty hefty, I mean, mid to mid-high recoil increase. Puts it up here, and you can see that like this one's more weighted by its recoil versus this one's much more weighted by its damage, pushing it up towards the top. And then the same thing with the Oden. The Oden, the AK, and the Grau all kind of rank sort of the mid to high area. The Grau obviously boosted up by its recoil, whereas the Oden's boosted up in how good it is by its time to kill. And then under that, we've got the Val, and the AMAX. Okay, contenders in their time to kill rankings. They just sort of have either not too good recoils or not too good PTK increases, which put them down here. And sort of the worst of the bunch is the M4, the Ram, the M13, and the Kilo. Kilo just being absolutely awful because of the recoil increasing. The M13 again, recoil increase, and then the M4 and the Ram have really good, barely any recoil increase from their base. I don't know, barely any, but comparatively, it's not too much recoil increase from the base. But their time to kill increases just make it not really worth it to use. So that's everything. Let me know your thoughts. Sorry, it was kind of a long video due to this sort of thing, working on what's important to talk about and what's not. Thanks for watching.